The flagship of the Velari Dominion was a place where people spoke in careful sentences and walked with the posture of individuals who believed the fate of star systems might depend on their posture. On deck 17, however, a human crew member was arguing with a vending machine. "I gave you the correct credit," he said. The machine blinked. "I disagree. You dispensed nothing. I dispensed disappointment." He stared at it. "That's not a beverage." Across the corridor, a Velari officer paused and quietly walked away, deciding this conversation was above their pay grade. The human sighed and leaned against the wall, holding the empty cup he had been expecting to fill with something caffeinated and possibly legal. Life aboard a diplomatic vessel docked to the Velari flagship had been mostly uneventful. He fixed minor electrical problems, replaced burnt-out relay coils, and occasionally explained to alien engineers why humans insisted on labeling wires. "It helps us remember things," he had once said. The Velari engineers had stared at him with respectful confusion. His current shift had ended 10 minutes earlier, which meant he had exactly two options: attempt sleep in a room that hummed constantly with starship vibrations, or wander somewhere quiet and pretend he had important thoughts about the universe. He chose the second option. A short walk later, he found himself in the observation chamber overlooking the nebula surrounding the flagship. The room was dim and peaceful, the wide glass viewport showing drifting clouds of violet gas and distant stars shining like patient witnesses. He sat down. "Finally," he muttered. His personal terminal chimed. A maintenance request appeared. He stared at it. "No," the terminal chimed again. "No." He turned it off. Several minutes passed while he sat quietly watching the slow movement of cosmic dust outside the window. Then the door opened. He assumed it was another engineer looking for the same quiet space. Instead, someone else entered. Tall, graceful, surrounded by faint arcs of glowing energy that moved behind her head like silent halos. He blinked. "Oh," he said politely. The woman stopped walking and studied him with luminous eyes that seemed far too focused for someone simply wandering through a ship. He suddenly realized two important things. First, she was Velari. Second, she was wearing a neural crown. Even someone with limited knowledge of Velari culture knew what that meant. He stood up quickly. "Hello," he said. The queen of the Velari Dominion tilted her head slightly. "You are human." "Yes." "You appear relaxed." "I thought I was alone." She walked closer, her gaze shifting briefly toward the stars outside the window. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then she asked a question so unexpected that the human wondered if his translator had malfunctioned. "How do humans sleep?" He blinked again. "Usually horizontally." The glowing arcs behind her head flickered slightly. "Explain." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, we lie down, close our eyes, and try not to think about things." She looked at him carefully. "I have not done that in many years." He frowned. "That sounds unhealthy." The most powerful ruler in the Velari Dominion nodded. "Yes." The human stood very still, mostly because he had just realized he was talking casually to the ruler of a civilization that commanded fleets large enough to block out stars. He cleared his throat. "So, when you say you haven't slept in years," he said carefully, "do you mean metaphorically?" The queen shook her head. "No, that seems medically concerning. It is politically necessary." He nodded slowly. "That is even more concerning." The faint arcs of energy behind her head shifted slightly as the neural crown resting along her temples emitted a quiet pulse of light. "You see this device," she said. "The glowing crown connected to your brain." "Yes." "I had guessed that was important. It connects my mind to the Dominion's quantum command network." "That sounds intense." "Every fleet movement, defense system, diplomatic channel, and strategic analysis passes partially through my consciousness." The human blinked. "So you're basically the galaxy's busiest email inbox." She paused. "That analogy is surprisingly accurate." He leaned back slightly against the observation railing. "And you're connected all the time." "Yes. No breaks. No vacation days. No, he winced. I get cranky when my phone buzzes too much. The Queen looked at the stars for a moment. For my species, sleep requires neural silence, and your brain never gets silence. Correct. He thought about that. That sounds like trying to sleep in the middle of a traffic control tower. I do not know what that is. It's loud. The glowing nebula outside the observation window drifted slowly while the Queen studied him with curious attention. Humans sleep differently than Velari, she said. Probably. Explain the biological process. Well, our bodies kind of synchronize things. Synchronize. Heartbeats, breathing, brain activity. It all settles into a rhythm. She listened carefully, and this rhythm causes sleep. Usually, she tilted her head slightly. You said earlier humans sometimes sleep near other humans. Yeah, why? He shrugged. Comfort mostly. Explain. Sometimes people rest their heads in someone else's lap or shoulder. Hearing another person's heartbeat and breathing can calm the nervous system. The glowing arcs behind her head flickered again. Synchronized biological rhythms, she said quietly. Exactly. Her gaze sharpened. Would that work on Velari neurology? I have absolutely no idea. She walked closer to him. The human straightened slightly. Before this conversation continues, he said, I should confirm something. Yes, you are definitely the Queen, yes, and this is not some kind of strange psychological test. No, good. He exhaled. Because the next part might be awkward. She looked at him calmly. I am familiar with awkward. He pointed gently toward the observation bench. You're thinking about trying the human method. Yes. With me? Yes. That feels like something your security team might strongly object to. That is likely. He looked around the quiet chamber. Do they know you're here? No, that is also concerning. She stepped closer and sat beside him. The arcs of psionic energy behind her head pulsed faintly as if reacting to something. The human shifted slightly. I would like it noted for the historical record that this was not my idea. Noted. Without hesitation, the Queen leaned sideways and rested her head in his lap. The human instantly forgot how to move. His entire nervous system entered emergency mode. Okay, he whispered to the universe. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The Queen remained perfectly still. The neural crown emitted a faint hum. The human stared straight ahead at the nebula outside the window while his brain attempted to process the situation. Then the hum from the crown slowly faded. The arcs of energy behind her head flickered and dimmed. Her breathing slowed. And for the first time in decades, the Queen of the Velari Dominion fell asleep. The human remained completely still, not because he was calm, but because the ruler of an interstellar empire was currently asleep in his lap, and he suspected sudden movement might start a war. For several minutes the observation chamber remained silent except for the quiet rhythm of breathing that he had very carefully decided not to disturb. He stared at the nebula outside the window. Okay, he whispered to himself. This is manageable. Behind him the door slid open. 3 royal guards entered at full alert speed. They stopped instantly. The first guard blinked. The second guard slowly lowered a weapon. The third guard leaned forward slightly, as if trying to confirm that the universe had not broken. In the center of the room sat a human maintenance worker with a toolbox on the floor beside him. In his lap slept the Queen, peacefully. The human raised one finger. Before anyone panics, he whispered, I did not knock her unconscious. The guards looked at one another. One of them spoke quietly into a communicator. Medical team to observation chamber. Another pause. Yes, the Queen is here. A longer pause. No, she is not injured. The guard glanced back at the human. She appears to be sleeping. A voice from the communicator asked something loudly. The guard lowered the device slightly. No, I am not joking. Within moments, the quiet observation chamber filled with scientists, medical officers, and several very nervous royal advisors. They all stopped when they saw the same scene. The human tried to smile politely. I assume this is unusual. The chief scientist stepped forward slowly holding a neural scanner. For 32 years, the scientist said carefully, the queen has been unable to enter deep sleep. The human nodded. Yes, she mentioned that. The scientist activated the scanner. The device hummed softly as it analyzed the neural crown and the queen's brain activity. The scientist frowned. That cannot be correct. Another researcher leaned closer. What do the readings show? She is in deep neural sleep. The room went quiet. One advisor whispered, that has not happened since before her coronation. The human raised a small but important question. Hypothetically speaking, if she wakes up and finds 20 people staring at her, will that ruin the sleep? Everyone slowly stepped backward. The scientists continued scanning quietly. More data appeared. Neural harmonics, brainwave patterns, biological rhythms. The chief scientist looked from the scanner to the human and back again. This is extraordinary. What is? The human asked. The scientist pointed at the readings. Your heartbeat. My heartbeat? Yes, that's usually a good sign. It is synchronizing with her neural patterns. Another scientist nodded. The human cardiac rhythm is interfering with the neural crown signal. The human blinked. Interfering. Yes, in a bad way. No, the scientist looked amazed. It is blocking the command network just enough for her brain to rest. Across the room, several advisors stared at the human with expressions usually reserved for discovering a new law of physics. The human looked down at the sleeping queen. So my heart is basically jamming the Empire's network. The scientist nodded slowly. Yes. The human sighed. I knew skipping exercise would eventually become important. The human remained seated in the observation chair, while the most powerful ruler in the Velari Dominion continued sleeping peacefully in his lap. Around him, the observation chamber had become extremely quiet again, not because nothing was happening, but because no one wanted to be responsible for waking the queen. The chief scientist whispered to another researcher while staring at the neural monitor. Her brain is fully in delta wave sleep. That is impossible. It is currently happening. One of the royal advisors leaned toward the human. How long has she been asleep? He checked the wall clock. About 40 minutes. The advisor blinked slowly. That is the longest uninterrupted sleep cycle she has experienced in 32 years. The human nodded carefully. I would like to note that I am still afraid to move. Please do not move. I was not planning to. Another scientist pointed at the neural crown readings. The command network signal has weakened significantly. That is the human's heartbeat rhythm, another researcher replied. The human raised one hand slightly. I feel like I should apologize for disrupting the Empire's communication infrastructure. No, the scientist said quickly. Please continue existing exactly as you are. Across the room, several royal guards stood perfectly still, watching the situation with expressions usually reserved for extremely confusing battlefield reports. One guard finally whispered, so, we protect the human now. Another guard nodded slowly. Yes. The human sighed. That sounds like a lot of pressure for someone who fixes wiring. Minutes later, the queen stirred slightly. The entire room froze. Her breathing changed. The glowing arcs of psionic energy behind her head flickered faintly as the neural crown slowly resumed partial synchronization with the Dominion's command systems. Then her eyes opened. She remained still for a moment, clearly processing something unfamiliar. Quiet, peace, the absence of thousands of simultaneous signals flooding her mind. She sat up slowly and looked around the room filled with very careful scientists and very nervous guards. Then she looked at the human. That was remarkable. The human nodded. I am very glad you enjoyed it. The chief scientist stepped forward immediately. Your Majesty, you slept for 47 minutes. The queen blinked. 47. Yes, that is extraordinary. She stood and the arcs of energy behind her head brightened again as the command network slowly reconnected to her mind. Yet something was different. The tension that had lived behind her eyes for years had softened slightly. She looked back at the human. Your biological rhythms interrupted the neural crown signal. That was not intentional. It was effective. The scientists continued reviewing their data. Human cardiovascular rhythms appear to synchronize with Velari neural patterns, the chief researcher explained. In simple terms, another scientist added, the human heartbeat disrupts the quantum command network just enough to allow rest. The human leaned back slightly. So my heart accidentally jammed the most powerful communication system in the Dominion. That is correct. He nodded. I feel like the engineering department will want to hear about this. The Queen studied him carefully. For decades, the Dominion believed my sleeplessness was the price of ruling an empire. And now we know the solution was sitting quietly on a diplomatic ship arguing with vending machines. He smiled slightly. That machine started it. Across the observation window, the nebula continued drifting slowly past the flagship. For the first time in many years, the Queen felt something